evening. My apologies there. You're welcome, very welcome to a brand new series of webinars here from myself and my colleagues in Teagasc, Sligo, Leitrim, Donegal. My name is Cian Condon. I'm a dry stock advisor based in Manorhamilton in County Leitrim, and I'll be your host here this evening. We're entering a very important and a very busy period on our farms, and these webinars, which take place over each Tuesday night over the next 8 weeks, will reflect that with lots of important, useful and hopefully timely information at this time. Tonight we have an all Donegal panel, John Cannon from the Letterkenny office and Seamus Campbell from the Carndonagh office, and they'll be covering pre-lambing nutrition, which of course is critical for getting strong, healthy lambs down at birth and plenty of colostrum in the ewes. Both John and Seamus will present for about 20 minutes, plus some time for questions. At the end of this, we'll have questions at the end, and at the end of our session, my apologies. At this time, obviously, we can't meet face to face, but we hope you'll send in your questions and your comments using the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll put it to John and Seamus towards the end of the session. So after that technical error, without any further ado, I'll ask for John to share his screen, please, John.
Okay, good evening, audience out there, and I hope that what we bring you tonight is fairly timely, because we're into the last rundown now before lambing. Most flocks, lowland flocks, are lambing around St. Patrick's Day or the 17th of March, so I think it's a good opportune time to touch on these topics. As Cian outlined, my colleague Seamus Campbell will cover the nutrition of the hill ewe, and I will concentrate on the lowland ewe. Now, and this is just a brief overview of our talks, which will last about 20 minutes each. First of all, it's not just all about feeding. You know, management is critical, and we'll touch on that. We'll dwell a lot on the importance of ewe body condition and using that as a barometer to assess how we are managing the ewe. Space requirements, floor space, and maybe more importantly, trough space. You know, whether you're lambing indoors or outdoors has a big influence on how you manage the flock. Silage quality, we'll discuss scanning rate, lambing date, and how that affects feeding. We'll also chat about ration evaluation and the role of protein. And something that's not on the screen here, I'll just draw your attention to, is a topic that I covered in my last talk before Christmas, was liver fluke. And again, why we're not dealing with it tonight is, you know, if your flock is having problems, they're thin and they're not responding to feed, it's something to maybe have a chat with your vet about and see, you know, are you making the right approach there, because there are reports of losses and problems with liver flukes in ewes this year. Body condition. Now, really, the key to managing a sheep flock is managing body condition. And it doesn't really matter what time of year you're in, but now is a very critical time. The advice is to keep the ewes in a range of 3 to 3.5 in the body score range. It's a range from 1 to 5. So you know, 1 would be almost dead, and 5 would be grossly over fat. So 3 to 3.5 is a target condition. And I've shown you 2 diagrams there, maybe where to assess body condition. Over the back was just and over the spinous processes, and along the side of the ribs there as well. Now, the target body condition scores are at mating time around 3.5, which is well past, but it's very important to have a good body condition there to have a good scan rate. And at lambing time, you'd like them at lambing around 3.5, but you could afford maybe to have a slight loss, maybe down to a minimum of 3.25, but ideally 3.5. And if you want to allow the flock to lose a bit of condition, really is to have them lambing at 3.5 and then allow them to milk up their backs then for 3 or 4 weeks up until they get into peak milk flow at about 4 to 5 weeks post lambing. So again, you're using the body condition score from the time the ewe is housed or pre-Christmas time. And even though we often talk about feeding ewes in the last 6 to 8 weeks, if some of the ewes getting thin at Christmas time or before it or at scanning time, you have to step in then with extra feed and try and correct that. Space requirements is important, especially in winter feeding. If the ewes are indoors, because they're dependent on you for whatever feed they get. They have a bit more options outside if there's a bit of forage around. There's different space requirements for shorn or unshorn ewes, or between large ewes and small ewes, and we'll talk about that. And heavier ewes, as they come near lambing, they'll need more space, and it's an area that's often overlooked. This is just an area slide here on floor space guidelines, and you can see there it varies from slatted floor, you're chatting about 1 to 1.2 square meters per ewe for unshorn ewes, and on straw you're chatting about a bit more, but 1.1 to 1.4 square meters, depending on the size of the ewe, whether she's a very heavy, we say 80 kilogram Suffolk Cross Texel ewe, or maybe a lighter Hill Cross ewe would get away with a smaller body condition, maybe something in the order of 60 to 70 kilos. Shorn ewes, you can get away with a bit less, and a floor space on shorn ewes. But the important thing is, as the ewe comes near lambing time, to keep an eye on that in space, because they'll need more space at that point. Feed barrier space, this is a critical area, and it depends how much meal has been fed. But really, the best guide is when you're feeding meal, all the ewes should be able to eat at the same time. And in fact, Basil Lohman, of prominent Scottish nutritionist and advisor, he advocated they should all have room and then pull one out, and just to allow that bit extra freedom. This is just a guideline here for ewes, 450 millimeters to 600 millimeters, or 18 inches to 2 feet in imperial measurements, depending on the size of the ewe. Again, if she's a Hill Cross ewe or a large lowland ewe. And that's if they're eating, out to, as you can see in the top picture, if they're eating on both sides of a double-sided trough there, you can get away with a bit less space, about 300 to 500 millimeters per ewe, because they have more. The ewes are not all eating on the one side. Ad lib space can be significantly lower because they're getting a mixed ration of meal and silage, and they have access to it 24/7, or should have, so that you can get away with less space there. But I dare say there are not too many on the call that will be feeding with a diet feeder. Beware here of this area, though, in corners of pens, because you just can't measure the would say along the side and the front and say, well, that's their feeding space. Because in the corner here, if a ewe is facing forward, she's taking up the space maybe of 2 ewes that will be eaten on at the walk-through trough, or vice versa. So you have to subtract, a bit of space there because of that, and that's critical. Feed management is another area that you need to pay attention to. Clean out, unused, forage regularly. It's more important if your silage quality is poor, because you'll have more waste there. It needs to be done at least weekly, and maybe even twice weekly. How you feed is very important as well. Meal should be, fed twice a day once you go over a pound a day or 500 grams a day. So feed in two feeds. That gives the rumen or the ewe stomach a more constant feed. So it should not getting a big heavy feed of meal. If you're getting, we'll say, 1.5 kilos or 2 kilos in one go, that'll be very heavy and very likely to give you problems with acidosis and stomach upsets. Ewes should have access to clean water at all times, and you should clean the water drinker at least daily, especially when you start to feed a lot of meal, because that often gets ewes go to the drinker with meal around their lips, and it can cause bacteria to grow there. Feeding the pregnant ewe, as I maybe outlined earlier, it's not that just straightforward. It's a series of balancing acts depending on the roughage quality, the ewe's body condition score, and live weight, and the stage of pregnancy. The scanning rate, whether there's a big difference between feeding a ewe the scanning for 1 or 2 or 3 lambs. And it's important here that sheep feeds are not all the same. And just don't go by the name. Some might be super nuts or high quality nuts, or yo milker or super this or super does. Go by the ingredients on the label. And as well, maybe you might even have to ask the salesman or the miller, what ingredients are there. And the other thing to bear in mind is that yos, as you all know, they don't all lamb on the same date. So the first of them will be lambing maybe on 17th of March, but the last of them won't be lambing until, maybe into April. And so, those, if you're feeding them heavy now, they're going to have a lot of meal consumed by the time that they reach lambing date. This is a chart that you'll see here quite often. It's an Eblex chart, and the important thing on it really is the last third of pregnancy here. You can see here that the amount of the rapid fetal growth that occurs during the last, we'll say from day 90 to day 147 or birth. In the early stages of pregnancy, there's very little happening except the placenta's growing. But in the last 7 or 8 weeks, there's a huge growth there in the fetus, and that puts pressure on the yolk, on her rumen, and on her ability to eat roughage. This is just another slide of it here. The week 12, you can see that the uterus is quite small, but week 20, there's big pressure coming on there from the uterus and the newborn lambs. She could be carrying 2 or 3 lambs, so that's increasing the pressure. And at that stage, the yolk needs 66% more energy versus week 12, and she needs 100% more protein. So, and space is running out. This is just a chart here. I'll put up a few charts to you, maybe to explain, energy, or how to measure energy, or you may be reading about it. First of all, this is 8 weeks from lambing down to lambing date on the left-hand side. This is just the energy requirements here in megajoules. You might see that mentioned on a label. Don't worry too much about the figures. It's just, you can see that the requirement here is 10 megajoules 8 weeks out, but it goes up to 16 to 18 at lambing time. So there's a big increase there. At the same time, the yolk's ability to intake roughage is decreasing. You can see 1.8 8 weeks out down to 1.3. So there's less room there, so she can't eat as much. And at the same time, crude protein requirement is also increasing. So it's a complicated process feeding yolks during the last 8 weeks of pregnancy, and it's important to remember that. This is just another chart. You might be reading about net energy, or UFLs, and this is just the same as the last chart, only just expressed in a different way. An 80 kilogram yolk here carrying 2 lambs or 10 kilograms at lambing time. 1 UFL is the energy content, or energy equivalent of 1 kilogram of air-dried barley. The yolk needs about 0.88 of a UFL for maintenance. That's regardless of her stage of pregnancy. But 2 lambs 6 weeks from lambing need about 0.13. So adding that to 0.1 to 0.88 gives you about 1 UFL, whereas at lambing time, this demand here is going up to 0.7. So 0.7 and 0.88 gives you 1.6. So you can see that there's a 60% increase there over the last 6 weeks of pregnancy. It doesn't matter how you measure it. I mentioned silage quality. Now, this is a very important aspect of your nutrition, and it's a pity, that a lot more of you out there aren't availing of the silage analysis processes that are available. You can get your silage analyzed free now, but a lot of times from your meal compounder or your local co-op. And it's something you should do, because it's critical, really, and especially in early pregnancy when the yolk isn't maybe getting meal. This is just some results here from the 2019-2020 Teagasc Better Farm and silages, and you can see there, while the average or the mean was 70% DMD, which is very high quality, the range was from 65 to 76, and the protein as well, which is critical, the average was 12.4, but the range was from 6.6 to 15.4. Now, the question I would pose to you out there tonight is, where is your silage on that scale there? Because if it's down here, you need to be feeding a lot more meal than if it's, we'll say, at the average here, or even at the max. So that's really where I'm coming from. So you need to know what kind of silage you're making. This is a table that you'll see quite often, and it's feeding over the last 8 to 10 weeks of pregnancy. There's a lot of figures there, but I'll just dwell maybe on 2 lines along here. The 70% DMD, which is very good silage, that if you're feeding a yolk with twins, that type of silage, you would need about 28 kilograms of meal over the last 8 weeks. Whereas if that if she's only getting 65% DMD silage, which most silages would be in that order, 65 to 70, that yolk needs 35 kilograms of meal before she lambs down. So there's a huge difference there. And if you're only feeding 28 kilograms to yolk that's getting 65% DMD silage, she's going to be short of energy, and something has to give in that scenario. It doesn't really matter whether you start, we'll say, low and build up, or if you start, we'll say, around, feeding on a flat rate basis. It really doesn't matter from research how you do that. The important thing is that you get those levels of meal in over the last 6 or 8 weeks. And you can see here, if you're down to 60% DMD silage, the requirement pre-lambing is a massive 46 kilograms. Another area to pay attention to really is ration quality and the label. High energy ingredients are in green here: cereals, maize, barley, gluten, maize, barley, oats, and wheat, beet pulps, soybean meal, distillers, peas and beans, small amounts of molasses and oil. They're high quality ingredients. Medium energy ingredients are corn gluten, soya hulls, and rapeseed meal. Now, these in red, and they're in red for a good reason. They're low energy, maybe less digestible ingredients: pollard or wheat feed, palm kernel, sunflower, oat feed, and cottonseed. Now, ideally, you'd like to see none of those in a ration, but if you do see them, you would like to see them well down the label. And I'll draw your attention to a ration label. Ingredients are listed by inclusion rate in the descending order, so that if you look at a label, the ingredient with the highest amount in that ration is the first ingredient mentioned on the label, and the last one is the lowest, which is usually the minerals or the vitamins. I'll take you now to two sample meals, and a point to mention as well is that the first 3 ingredients in a ration always tell, the label tell you really what kind of tells you a lot about that ration, and that's where I would focus on. This ration has rolled barley, oats, corn gluten, rapeseed meal, sunflower, molasses, distillers, soya hulls, citrus pulp, oat feed, flaked maize, soybean meal, calcium carbonate, which is lime in another name. Now you can see there that they were, first of all, the comments that I mentioned there, that it's suitable for early pregnancy. Why do you say that? And but the soybean meal is too low for late pregnancy, really. But having said that, they're all good ingredients, so it's not a bad ration, but it's not for use in the last 3 or 4 weeks before lambing time. The crude protein is 17%, which is reasonably high, but you can see here the soybean meal is very low down. There's very little soybean meal in it. So it's fine for early pregnancy or up to mid-pregnancy, but you need to change for later on in the feeding. This is another example here of a ration here now, and you can see maize, soybean, and sugar beet pulp or peat pulp are the first 3 ingredients. So you're looking good here straight away. Barley, wheat, distillers, maize gluten, palm kernel, sunflower seed, wheat feed, rapeseed, citrus pulp, calcium carbonate, palm oil, and sodium chloride, which is salt. Now, the crude protein here is 18%. My comments on that are suitable for late pregnancy. The crude protein could be higher, and really, what I'm saying there is, if you have a high scan rate, a lot of twins, a lot of triplets, maybe we'll say if you had 70% twins and maybe scattered 20% triplets, or maybe you would like a higher crude protein, maybe of 19 or 20. Having said that, for a lot of you, it would be suitable enough if your scan rate is about 1.7, 1.8. There's some poor ingredients in it, we say palm kernel and wheat feed. Ideally, as I said, I would like to see none of those in it, but they're fairly low down in the label, so depending on the price and everything else, you might tolerate it. Now, some take-home messages regarding the feeds. First of all, you need to check the yow's body condition regularly. And even you're sticking to those tables there, if the yow is losing condition, you have to step in with extra feeding because something's not right. Either maybe they could have liver fluke and that needs to be looked after, or else your roughage quality isn't as good as it should be. Check the ration ingredients. And if you only go home with maybe a couple of messages tonight, these will be some of them to look at here. Check the label and see what ingredients are in it. Are they in the green list that I had there, the orange list, or are they in the red list? And a key message here tonight is aim to have 20% soybean meal in the ration during the last 2 weeks of pregnancy. Ask your miller what's in it, or ask the salesman. And don't be put off by stories that 20% soybean is very sore in yows, it's this, that, or the other. You'll probably have a lot of stories to listen to the year because soya is quite is well up in price. It's normally around 360 to 400. It's over 500 euros a ton at the minute. So they'll probably be trying to limit the amount of soya in rations. Don't worry about the early pregnancy. It's the last 2 or 3 weeks that you have to be concerned about. You can add soybean meal to a ration during the last 2 weeks. If, for example, you have a ration maybe forward bought and it doesn't have enough soy in it, the rate you should add would be about 100 grams for every lamb in the scan. So if it's yow carrying a single lamb, 100 grams per yow per day. If it's a yow carrying 2 lambs, you're chatting 200 grams per yow per day. And you can cut back the ration then by the equivalent amount if you're adding that in. And just to give you a pointer there, spring grass is over 20% protein. Just again, a recap there that over the last 6 weeks of pregnancy, 65% DMD silage or hay or that matter, you're chatting about 35 kilograms of meal over the last 6 weeks. And just for yows that are carrying singles, you can go with about 30% less. So if your pen of yows that are carrying singles or 2 pens, whatever, they should be on maybe on 20, about 30% less, about 11 kilos less. So you're chatting about 24 kilos for yows that are in singles. Triplet carrying yows should be getting 30% more. So you need to be feeding them those about 46 kilograms over the last 6, 7, 8 weeks. Just I mentioned that already there. And remember that later lamb and yows will consume more. So that's why it's important to group your yows according to scanning rate, or if you're scanning for doubles, keep them together. Then try and group them as well with the early lambers and the later lambers, group separately, because the later lambers you don't need to start feeding as early with those. Or if you do start early, maybe just feed them at a lower level until later on in pregnancy, because as I say, they'll be getting fed for a lot longer. And the final message there was focus on the percentage soybean. The message I'm giving you is 20% during the last 2 to 3 weeks. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll let Seamus talk to you about the hull yow, and I'll answer questions later.
That's great. Thanks, John. If you want to stop sharing your screen there, that'd be great. So just Seamus, if you want to share, you can go straight ahead and share your screen, and you can begin then. Just while Seamus is getting set up, just like to remind you that we do have the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to send in any questions on either John's presentation or on Seamus's, which is upcoming now, that you just send them on there, and I'll put them to the panel before we finish up.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks, Cian, for that. Just to follow on from John's points there, I'm just covering the hull sector and the hull yow and what type of rations she needs or what type of feeding she needs. First of all, it's important to realise that there's different types of hulls. There's high hulls, there's low hulls. There's green hulls, there's hulls with, headery hulls. Melania type hills, and then, so there's a different variety. On the bottom left there, you see a picture there of, of a Melania type hill, basically found mostly on wet heath. And from the months of January probably into May, like, it's poor enough grazing for sheep or for any animals, because the grass turns white on it and it actually becomes a fire hazard, that kind of ground. So it wouldn't be great ground, but in the summer it's good for grazing, and the late autumn it can graze away, and it's generally found at lower heights. The top right picture then would be a more of a heathery type hill, good for grazing from January to March, and also in the summer there's plenty of roughage there, and no animals will ever be hungry on it. It's generally found at higher heights, hill heights, and it's found in drier heats. The bottom right then is greener type hills, more limestone type ground, very good grazing in the summer and the autumn for animals, and it's a pretty good types of hills, green hills. Fluke generally, and we'll mention it later on, it would be probably worse on the Melania type ground. On the heathery type ground, it wouldn't be as bad due to the acidy type nature of the land, but we'll mention that later on in our talk. So the type of hill determines the type of ewes you keep, the length of time on the hill, and the stocking rates. So the hill systems mainly, we're chatting here about outdoor systems, mainly outdoor lambing systems in general. There's low return, so the costs have to be kept low. Weather is an issue, and you have to try and lamb to grass. And people, farming in hills, growth starts later than it does on low ground or lower ground. Every 100 feet above, sea level you go, the temperature is lower, you get more rain and that. So the growth doesn't start till later than it would start to, grow on lower type pasture. So the other thing with the hill lambs is that they mature later in the year, probably November, December, and there's a long keep on them. So, farmers have to make that decision too, to sell them as stores or do they keep them longer. Body condition on hill ewes is probably very difficult to, determine or work out sometimes, because they're outdoors and they don't, farmers wouldn't see them as much. They're on expansive hills and that, and farmers wouldn't see them as much as, lowland sheep. One thing to look out for probably this time of year would be sheep that separate from the flock anyway. On David and Linda McLaughlin's Better Hill Farming in his own in Donegal, David would have a good bit of green ground. So, he would be the type of farmer that would have a good bit of green ground to mix with hill ground. So he would mate around the 10th of November, scan around the 10th of February, which is around now, the next week, and the singles are put back on the hill, and the tinios and doubles are separated out and kept on the green ground and fed. So depending on your system, depending on the amount of green ground, we'll chat about that, when you mate and when you scan. David's singles basically are put back on the hill, as we said, and they're fed, 0.2 of a kilogram every second day. And what you do yourself depends, on the type of hill you have and the stocking rate, on the hill. All hills, as we said, are different. There's different types, so it'll depend on your own circumstance. Big lambs, some farmers say if the lamb too late, the lambs get big, and especially the end of April, early May, that can be more of a problem if the ewes are grazing and are fed on green ground, along with twin ewes and that. But generally, big lambs are not that big an issue if the singles are left on the hill. So you have also a group of farmers out there, who are farming hill ewes and Greenland, and they should be treated as a lowland flock, and treated the same way as what John Cannon was saying there earlier on. So the singles, I suppose it depends too on the year in question. If there's a lot of rain and wind and that, you might have to look at them more often on the hill, and how early the lambs, how early they're going to lamb. David's Doubles then, he starts them off after scanning on 0.2 of a kilogram, moving up to 0.75 of a kilogram before lambing. And as John has mentioned earlier on, if you're feeding over half a kilogram, you need to really split the feeding twice a day. And one thing you need to be, if you are feeding hill sheep outside, you need to be kind of time consistent, because if you're feeding them on good roughage and there's plenty of roughage there for them, they will go away and graze most of the day, and they will come at the same time for feeding all the time. But if you start changing around the times, they'll stay at the feed troughs the whole day. Something to watch out for maybe sometimes is, slow eaters, especially among doubles, they get thinner and you can run into issues then of twin lamb disease. So feeding there, the question we'd ask a lot of the time, do you know how much you're feeding? Or can you measure it in any way? So we've 2 buckets there. We've one on the left and one on the right. The ordinary bucket most farmers are using is the feed bucket on the left. So that would contain about 11 to 12 kilograms of feed. You know what I mean? And again, maybe it depends on the type of feed you're feeding. Also, if you're feeding oats, it's a lot lighter. Whereas the bucket on the right would contain about 8 kilograms of feed. So you need to know the size of the bucket you're feeding and how to measure out your feedstuffs. So 11 kilograms, that's coming in at about 24 pounds, and 8 kilograms is coming in at about 17.5 pounds. So it's important to know how much you're feeding, and always go a little bit extra, because there will be greedy sheep and they'll eat more than the ones that are slower eaters, as we've said. Question a lot of hill farmers ask, should you feed meal or should you feed silage or haylage or hay or stuff like that there? If you can, and if you have the time, you're better feeding meal, even every 2 days, if you have the time to do it, because, there'll be better results from it, because you don't know what kind of silage you're feeding unless you have it tested. And, generally roughage is not the problem for a lot of hill farmers. It's, energy and, it's poor quality grass that's the problem. So meal's a better buy, even though, the price of it is increasing and it is expensive. But, it's a better feed to feed hill sheep anyway than to be feeding them hay or silage. So a lot of hill farmers there, I suppose, the feed, a good bit of corn or oats there and intensive lamb, and it's a good feed for hill ewes, and then you can move over to a higher protein a few weeks before lambing. The 2 main losses for lambs, for most lambs, is infection and hypothermia. And on the hill situation, infection generally is not a big problem, because they're lambing outdoors on clean pastures and that, and it's not as big a problem as for lowland farmers. But hypothermia is, so you need the energy and you need the protein right for the ewe. You need the sheep in fairly good condition, to have good colostrum. Advantages of the hill system would be that it would use very little antibiotics. In most cases, watery mouth or joint ill wouldn't be really a problem in hill situations, and mastitis or foot rot wouldn't be problems on most hill farms. Where you would get problems maybe at lambing, where farmers gather sheep into the one fence or the one green area near lambing, and they leave them in there maybe for 4 or 5 weeks and feed them, it can get very dirty and you can get mastitis there. It can lead to mastitis. And you can have problems there with joint ill then with lambs. So if you are doing that, it's important to try and move the sheep around, to cleaner areas every week or every 2 weeks anyway, and you can move them back to the same field later on if you have to. Feeding outdoors, try and pick a good dry hard spot, if you can. And as John said earlier on, leave plenty of space between the troughs. Buy an extra trough if you have to. Don't have them pushing in, because it can, spread pink eye, and it can lead to injuries in that there if they're very tight, and it can put weaker sheep off eating, tamer sheep. A problem outside probably sometimes is dirty troughs, especially with bird droppings. So you need to clean, be aware that you will have bird droppings in the trough every day and clean them out, because bird droppings are a source. They can be a source of salmonella, and you could have an outbreak of salmonella abortion, lambing outdoors and feeding outdoors. So clean the bird droppings off your trough and any other dirt that's in the troughs. You want a sheltery spot so that the meal won't blow away, or that when it's raining, that it doesn't get too wet. And you don't want ewes running up a slope to the feeding if possible, especially twin ewes, because it can take on prolapse and things like that. There can put pressure on the ewes if they're going up too running up too steep a slope to feeding. Outdoor lambing for twins, if you are lambing out twins outdoors, pick a good rocky, hard spot. There's a picture there on the right of Michael McLaughlin's. He lambs 400 ewes outdoors there in Burnfoot, and he lamb them out in a rocky area with bushes and trees and rushes, sheltery spots, and they all lamb perfectly well on it, and there's no problems with the twins. You don't want to be lambing twins anywhere near rivers or water courses or brooks like that there. The ewe can leave one lamb behind sometimes, and the other lamb can slip into the brook, and you want to be picking your place for the right spot for lambing twins anyway. And you want a place that you can view easy enough without disturbance, that you can view without going in through the sheep all the time, because sheep like peace when they're lambing. How sheep do anyway. Lambing outdoors for singles. If you are lambing the singles near the farm, try and lamb them near a building, because they'll tend to give you more problems than the doubles. You'll have to, pull more of the lambs, and there'll be more assistance given. So you might need to put the ewe onto a shed. You generally have bigger lambs in that situation. Again, have a good clean environment, and watch out for the first 24 hours after lambing, because with lambs outdoors, they can get a bit of beastings in the first few hours, and maybe they don't get any milk after that for a good while, and they could live, if the weather is fairly hot, they could live maybe a couple of days without any milk. So if they're bleating and empty looking, it's likely they got no milk since being born. So it's something, maybe the teats get blocked or things like that happen. So the first 24 hours is very important after a lamb is born. Body condition of ewes, as I said, it's difficult for hull sheep. You need to try and identify the issues early on. The damage in some cases can be too late and it's already done. And identifying the problems too late can lead to even more problems if you put the ewe on a different diet too late on, close to lambing. It can affect her metabolism, and it can lead to bigger problems. So it's something to be aware of. If depending on when you lamb, you need to check your ewes 7 to 8 weeks out from lambing. 10 ewes generally have a problem there. When they do lamb, they leave the lambs behind because they're weaker and they're hungry after getting rid of the lamb, and they move off eating quickly. So they are a problem like that there. So on body condition, again, poor nutrition is an issue. Tooth problems, mineral deficiency, which we'll chat about in the next slide or two. Scab and itch is a big problem on hull sheep, mainly because the weather is wetter on hulls and you have more wind and you have a lot more problems. Ticks and fluke are the other two problems for hull sheep. If you have limited green ground, if you're short green ground, which a lot of hull farmers are, and it's a big problem for hull farmers, if you have good bit of hull, try and change the ewes to another hull. Like, they do benefit a lot from changing, even from ground, different types of ground. If you can get low ground, to change them onto low ground, all the better. But if not, change them to another hull even. Generally, farmers with a lot of, that have limited green land, they're generally the farmers that don't scan, because they've nowhere to land the twins anyway when they have them. So some of them don't scan, and maybe some of them don't put the ram with the ewes until the ewe is 2.5 years old. Generally, that's extensive systems, and there's lower weaning rates because it's difficult circumstances and difficult conditions a lot of them are working on. If you have limited green ground, the best option would be for you is to lamb after the 15th of April. Again, farmers could say maybe there's bigger lambs, that time of year, but if it's hill ewes, unless you're feeding them on green ground and they're feeding on good ground and they're on a big strong ration, generally the lambs won't be too big. Horns on lambs later on can be a problem. So for fellas, what little green ground, from the end of February to the end of March, or even the middle of February to the end of March, is a very important time to check your sheep on the hill, especially sheep that start coming down off the hill. You won't get weak sheep on the top of a hill or halfway up a hill, but you will get weak sheep down at the bottom of a hill. And if you get them sheep in the month of February or early March, there's a very good response with them to supplementation. So that's the month there to check the sheep. If you have sheep coming off a hill, they will come down themselves at the hill. They get weaker every week, and they do come down off the hill. So the ones at the top of the hill and halfway up are generally no problem. The Sligo lab, the Department of Agriculture Sligo, we had a visit there, last year or the year before last, and they have said that the two main problems in the Northwest with sheep are fluke and ticks. So, from mating to scanning, you want to be looking at doing giving two fluke doses there anyway, one in December and one probably in the beginning of February around now. Feed buckets, we'll mention them in the next slide. Dipping, you need to be dipping. If you've held sheep, you need to be dipping them twice a year really to counteract the ticks and a lot of the mites that are on the hills. Minerals, minerals can be a problem for farmers that are not feeding a lot of meal. If you're feeding a lot of meal, generally minerals won't be a problem. And the two big minerals that farmers are finding in Donegal, that's the problem, is the B12 or cobalt and the copper. Copper is a dangerous mineral for Texas, Shirleys and some lowland breeds, but it does seem to be a problem on a lot of hill sheep and lack of copper. So you won't know if you have a mineral problem until you start trying new minerals or new boluses, and wants to react well to that. Yeah, sorry about that there. The light went off there. Wants to react to that. Minerals, for fellas, as I said, that don't feed a lot of meal can be a problem. Buckets, mineral buckets, they're very expensive. They're over €1,000 a ton. So if they do work for you again and you find a good results with them, keep doing them, because you need to work on the hill system, the system that works best for your type of hill. The hoggets that you're keeping, generally hill farmers keep their own hoggets because they go back on their own hill. You need to try and keep them strong over the first winter. Don't overfeed them. You don't need to overfeed them. Feeding helps tame them for as ewes. If you don't have much green ground, you'll have to house them somehow. So it's important, to keep them strong anyway and keep them in fairly good condition. If you are putting hoggets back to the hill in the spring, it is a good time, maybe if you have problems with minerals in the hill, to try a bolus on a hogget to see how they react, or a bunch of hoggets to see how they react on your hill at a certain type of bolus or a certain mineral, and you'll see it shearing how well they do. Rams after mating, it's important, to keep them away from the ewes. Some farmers still feed them on with the ewes, and it's dangerous. Look after the ram, especially ram lambs, as they have a lot of them have soft bones. A few bags of nuts can make a big difference in the spring to especially ram lambs. After paying a lot of money for them, it's important to look after your rams. It's very important in a hill situation, if you do come across an easy lamb and ram, and a lamb that gives lambs a good vigor to try and have as many lambs out of them as you can, and good vigor ones that get up quickly and suck and don't give you any problems lambing around the shoulders. So on the summary of the hill situation, we're looking at a simple, keep it simple, watch your lambing date, match to grass growth for the hills, and grass growth in the hills, we're looking at the flow of grass coming the end of April, May, really. try to scan the yolks, even if you don't have much green ground. It does give you a chance to assess body condition around the early February. Every hill is different, and a lot depends on the type of run you have. And a few points finally then for hill management: keep a good young flock, 20 to 25% replacement rate. You need to dip twice a year, and dipping will also, even the lowland farmers probably should be dipping more. You see sheep's breaking down fences, scratching them that much, due to itching, scratching, and it's a very important thing. Dip in a lot of cases can be as good as a dose. Avoid early lambing if you're in a hill situation, unless you have plenty of green ground to feed the sheep and look after them in the spring. Try and scan, as I said. Mineral issues, you need to check it out in your own situation. You might have mineral problems and you may not have mineral problems, and there's no perfect system for a hill situation. You have to work the best one yourself. So thank you. So many questions from myself and John now.
Thanks very much, Seamus. That's great. If you want to stop sharing, we'll all come back on screen. That's great. Thanks very much, Seamus. So we had a number of questions in there. I know John's been looking at some of them on the system. So I'll just go through them as they come in here. You mentioned that feed space can be significantly less when feeding. It mentions here TMR, ad lib through the diet feeder. How much space would you recommend? Is 200 millimeters enough? Do you want to go at that, John? Because I know you talked about feed space.
Yeah, it should be enough, but like everything else, the more space you can give them, the better. Generally, most pens that they especially coming up to lambing time, you couldn't really give them enough space, because what you don't want is maybe if it depends on your feeding pattern as well. If yours are pushing in there when you come into the house with the diet feeder and they're pushing and shoving, you have more risk of prolapse the less space you have coming up to lambing. So I would always try and have as much space as possible in the last 3 weeks. Even though you might be tightening them up early on in pregnancy, I would try and have a situation over the last 3 weeks that there's plenty of room there, and as near to those figures that I quoted as possible, to avoid any kind of issues at all near lambing time.
That's great. Thanks, John. The next one was again, it was to do with somebody home mixing, so making their own ration at home. What would be considered, or is there a level that would be too high for a protein content if they're making it up themselves?
Yeah. If protein, that's a good question, because if protein levels are too high, the yolk needs to use energy to metabolize it and to excrete it. So you don't want, if protein levels are very high, you need very high quality energy ingredients in to balance that out. So as I said, 20%, 22% for very high scanning flocks is high enough in protein.
Okay. And I mentioned here, if the soya, I'm assuming that's in the ration that's being fed, is 16 to 18%, would you still feed the 100 grams soya per lamb, or would less do? No,
16 to 18% soya it's coming well up in what we're looking for. Like the 20% is probably the Rolls Royce ideal. So 16% to 18% really, it's a balancing act. Then is it worth feeding? You wouldn't need to feed 100 grams, because you're getting straight away quite a lot of soya in the ration. So maybe 40 to 50 grams. But then is it worth the bother of doing that in a ration like that? And maybe if you had a lot of twins and triplets, you would do that. But for an ordinary flock, maybe scanning, 1.7, 1.8, I would, if we were getting 16 or 18% soy in the ration, I would nearly go with it.
Okay. Just something that came in there towards the end after Seamus's presentation was a comment on scab. Would scab not be as bad or worse in the lowland, where they traditionally mightn't bother dipping? A lot of farmers are new to sheep, less than 10 or 15 years, and mightn't have facilities like the hillmen. I know in our area certainly.
Well, I'll maybe come in on that, and that maybe Seamus might comment on it, because he was involved in a dipping video there recently, and he might. Really, scab is becoming more of an issue across the board, and I wouldn't just single out any sector for it. It's becoming an issue, and there's really it's maybe there's a departure for me from plunge dipping has been the problem, and maybe the use of some of the injectables and that for its control. So maybe Seamus, I'll maybe let you come in on that. You were involved in a recent
video. That's a good point about scab. Scab is a problem probably with lowland farmers and hill farmers. Dipping is not that. It's a fairly quick job once you get at it, but it's just it's another job. You have to go through every sheep, and there's a bit of work on it. But as John says, the injectables are linked into some of the the worm products now and the fluke products, and there's resistance building there. You're using the same product for everything, and you need to try and get into the habit, whether you get a mobile dipper around or whatever, into the habit of dipping twice a year. Like dip does mend sheep and mend lambs, and you'll see it yourself in the sheep. The sheep are a lot more content. You won't see them scratching after it at all. So I know some people say dip's weaker than it was years ago, but the companies would say it's not. But everybody has their own opinion on that. But it is a problem on lowland farms too, right? But there is a lot of mobile dippers now going, and they do a fairly good job on the thing. And disposing of the dip's a very important thing. And we did a video there last September on that there. We have a video online on dipping and the rates. And the amazing thing about it is, you need to replenish the bath after every 35 ewes. So it's, you need to keep the dip in the bath because the sheep take it out. It's, the rates, are fairly, 600 mil per 1,000 litres initially, then going at 180 mils, per, for a top up after every 35 ewes. So it's a quite substantial top up all the time. And maybe that's why farmers are not getting good results sometimes with dip. They're not putting it on, or they're not keeping the bath strong enough. But definitely a big problem on lowland farms also.
A question come in as well on multiples. So if there are high rates of triplets or even some quads in the scanning, what would be considered the correct level of soya to go into the diet?
Well, again, I think really if the ration had 20% soya, 22% soya, and it's all good ingredients, I'd be happy enough with that. Generally, the rule of thumb for ewes was about 200 grams up to lambing, and then there's another area after lambing where there's the demand for high quality protein increases even more. So that's why it's very important to try and lamb your flock to grass, because it's nearly impossible to feed what they need post lambing unless they have access to high quality grass. So really, if you can't have grass on St. Patrick's Day, well, then you shouldn't be lambing it that time. You need to be lambing to grass so that they can get high quality protein as a good feed. And the best thing post lambing is new spring grass. But to be practical, you could, if you had a lot of, maybe a very high pen of twins and triplets, well, you could maybe look at feeding a bit of extra soy in it. But really, I would go there. Your previous year's experience as well comes into that.
Okay, and another question come in then on the inclusion of the likes of protected fats and yeast and that into rations. What are your thoughts in general on that?
Well, generally, those products are generally maybe an higher maybe spec rations a lot of the time, and they're usually fairly well included at the correct rates. But I would still go back to the, regardless what's in it, be it protected fat or whatever, you still need to go back to the ingredients. Look at the list of ingredients. Are they on the green list that we had, and is there 20% soy in it? That's the starting point. The rest then, to me, is protected fat. Really, is just for energy, and you wouldn't want high levels of it. It's like yourself, if you're eating a lot of butter or something like that for energy. A nice blend of good ingredients is the main thing.
Okay, just one final question now. If you just want to comment on, it's a query on the feeding of beet to sheep, and I'm just wondering what do you think at this time, particularly now we're talking about pre-lambing? What are your thoughts on feeding beet between now
Beet.
and lambing time? Yeah.
Well, but I presume, I don't think there'll be too much of it fed up in this parts of the country anyway. But again, it'll be low in protein, and there's nothing wrong with it as a feed, provided it's balanced correctly, and like any root crop, it's a good job. And the byproduct of beet pulp is a very good product. And it's a good source of roughage as well, and but it didn't have to be balanced for minerals and for protein. And I would anybody in that, they should be talking to their own advisor or consultant, and formulating a ration based on that basis.
Lovely, thanks very much. It's coming up to 9 o'clock there, John. Thanks for that there. So I just want to say that's close to it for this evening. As I said, we hope you found the presentations both useful and interesting, and I will be making this entire night available on our regional YouTube channel on the coming days. The series is going to be continuing on the upcoming Tuesday nights, and you can find full details by following Teagasc SLD on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Next week's webinar will focus on the preparation for calving, and we'd love if you can join us. Just before we finish,
Cian, there's one other point there, maybe that a question that I saw there was on vitamin E, which is very important as well, maybe for white muscle disease and that in lamb, especially if ewes are being fed untreated barley or acid-treated barley or cereals, that you need to pay attention to the vitamin E content, and to balance it, give extra vitamin E if the ration did include treated cereals. So sorry about that, Cian.
No problem, John. No problem, John. You actually interrupted, and maybe it's apt that I was going to say that before we finish, we'd like to recognise that this is likely to be the last regional event that we will be lucky to have the input of John Cannon, as retiring at the end of the month. And John has dedicated his career to farmers, both in Donegal and the much wider country, and he'll be missed by all. So on behalf of all his Teagasc colleagues, his clients, and I'm sure everyone who's been lucky enough to spend time in his company, we want to wish you a very long, happy and healthy retirement.
Thanks, Cian.
Yeah. Thanks very much. That's it for this evening. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. We hope we see you next week. Stay safe and good night.